It was a sunny Thursday morning in Los Angeles when Karoline Levitt received the unexpected email: "You've been invited to appear on the Ellen DeGeneres Show." Topic: Generation divide in American politics. At first glance, it looked like a standard media booking, but something about the wording, something in the way divide was emphasized, made her pause. Her team was skeptical. "It's Ellen," one of her aides said, tapping the email header. "She plays nice in front of the camera, but takes jabs with a smile." This could be a trap. Karoline leaned back in her chair at the small DC press office. Her signature navy blue blazer hung on the door. On her desk lay her worn-out pocket Constitution, its corners curled, its cover faded. "Let her try," Karoline said calmly. "If she wants to make a joke out of me, I'll bring truth to the punchline." By the time her flight landed at LAX, social media was already buzzing. Liberal influencers teased, "Why is Ellen inviting Trump's press girl?" Conservative accounts warned, "Don't fall for the ambush." But Karoline wasn't flustered. She had been underestimated before. Backstage at the Warner Brothers studio, a stylist asked if she wanted to soften her look. Karoline declined politely. "I'm not here to blend in," she said, slipping on her silver cross necklace and smoothing out her deep blue blouse. She didn't need flashy makeup or wardrobe changes, just clarity, conviction, and control. Meanwhile, Ellen stood off stage reviewing cards. "Let's make this interesting," she told her producer, raising an eyebrow. "A little tension gets the views up." The curtain lifted, cheers erupted. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Karoline Levitt." Ellen's voice was chipper, but the applause felt divided. Some cheers, a few boos. Karoline stepped into the spotlight, smile steady, back straight. Ellen greeted her with that famous grin, but her eyes, Karoline noticed, were measuring Karoline. Ellen began after some small talk. "You're young, ambitious, and working for a very controversial man. Don't you ever think maybe you're just reading someone else's script?" The audience laughed nervously. "Karoline didn't actually, Ellen," she replied, her voice calm but razor sharp. "I've been writing my own story since college, and I don't need applause to validate it." A flicker crossed Ellen's face. It had begun the moment Karoline delivered her calm, cutting reply. The temperature in the studio shifted. Ellen's trademark smile twitched, just enough to register annoyance. The audience laughed again, this time with uncertainty, as if unsure which way the show was tilting. "Touché," Ellen said, adjusting her seat. "But let's be real, when you speak on behalf of someone like Donald Trump, doesn't that come with a lot of baggage?" Karoline's expression didn't change. She leaned forward, her posture unshaken. "If you're referring to policies that strengthened the economy, protected our borders, and stood up to global bullies, then yes, I carry that baggage proudly." A few claps rose from the conservative-leaning side of the audience. Ellen chuckled, but it was sharper now, with less warmth. "Oh, come on," she said, her tone suddenly laced with mockery. "You don't really believe all of that, do you? Or are you just trying to be the next viral mouthpiece?" It was a classic Ellen move: wrap the jab in a joke and let the crowd laugh at the punchline. But Karoline didn't laugh. Instead, she pulled out a small printed report from her lap. "Here's something funny, Ellen," she said, unfolding it. Ellen blinked slowly. "According to your own 2018 interview, you praised Trump's economic plan for bringing factory jobs back to Middle America. What changed? Was it the facts or the politics?" The studio let out a collective gasp. Ellen blinked. She clearly wasn't expecting research. Karoline leaned in just a bit more. "You mock people like me for standing by our beliefs, but what really bothers you is that we don't back down even when we're outnumbered on shows like this." Ellen tried to brush it off. "You're passionate, I'll give you that, but passion without compassion is just noise." Karoline tilted her head. "And compassion without truth, that's Hollywood." That one hit. The audience stirred this time with murmurs. A few heads nodded, a few brows furrowed. From the control room, a producer whispered into Ellen's earpiece, "She's flipping the room, move on." But Ellen wasn't ready to. The audience stirred. "Move on? Oh, I've got more," she said with a grin that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Let's talk about women's rights, shall we? You claim to support women, but you work for a man accused by multiple women. How do you sleep at night?" Gasps, applause, a few cheers. Karoline didn't flinch. "I sleep just fine," she said slowly, "because I don't reduce women to victims. I believe in their strength, not their slogans." It was no longer a light-hearted interview. This was a battleground, and Karoline had just planted her flag. Ellen tapped her cue cards lightly, a practiced move to hide unease. The audience didn't react quite the way she expected. Normally, when she called someone out, especially a conservative, the crowd would erupt in easy laughter, but now there was tension. Karoline sat with perfect, you see, Ellen, composure. Hands folded in her lap, her silver cross necklace gleaming subtly under the lights. She didn't need to raise her voice, she didn't need to smirk, she let her words do the heavy lifting. "You see, Ellen," Karoline said, voice steady as stone, "people don't tune in to watch a political ambush disguised as comedy, they tune in for truth, even if it stings." The words landed. Even some of the crew backstage exchanged glances. Ellen let out a forced chuckle. You're a tough one, I'll give you that, but truth is complicated, and I'm not sure you see the whole picture. Karoline responded without missing a beat. Maybe not, but I see enough to know that faith, hard work, and love of country aren't punchlines, and yet every time someone on your side talks about unity they forget to include people like me. That line drew unexpected applause. I don't understand struggle. Sharp, real, and scattered across the room like lightning. The sound made Ellen hesitate, just long enough for Karoline to press forward. You say I don't understand struggle, she continued. I grew up in a middle-class New Hampshire family where we packed lunches, not privilege. I paid my way through school. I interned, hustled, failed, and stood up again. What I didn't do was inherit a talk show, millions of dollars, and a platform to mock people for their values. Boom. The audience let out a mixed reaction, some impressed, some shocked. Ellen's trademark smile finally slipped. For a moment she looked small behind her massive stage desk. You think I mock people? She asked. Quiet now. Karoline didn't flinch. I think you use laughter to avoid accountability, but not today. Ellen leaned back in her chair, heads turned, the card in her hand trembling just slightly, and that's when it happened. From backstage a voice called out loud enough to pierce the silence. She's not wrong. Heads turned, even Ellen turned. It was a young crew member, probably in his 20s, stepping into the edge of the set. I grew up watching this show, but she's saying things I wish someone had said 10 years ago. Gasps. Real ones. Karoline didn't turn to look. She didn't need to. The momentum was shifting, not just in the room but in the narrative. Ellen straightened up, blinking fast. Let's take a break, she said to the camera. The lights dimmed, but no one felt like laughing as the stage lights dimmed and the commercial music played in the background. The studio transformed. The crowd buzzed with nervous murmurs. Some applauded under their breath, others stared at Karoline with newfound curiosity. Ellen meanwhile sat frozen for a second longer than usual, long enough for her producers to notice. Backstage a senior producer rushed to her side. We need to pivot, he whispered. Social media is already reacting. Hashtags are popping up. Karoline claps back is trending. Ellen waved him off with a tight-lipped nod. I've got this, she whispered back. Meanwhile Karoline sat silently at her guest chair. She didn't scroll her phone, she didn't talk to anyone. She simply looked at the set, at the cameras, at the audience, at the blue and pink toned lights. And then she slowly adjusted her cross necklace, almost like a shield being fastened before battle. Her staffer Maddie approached from the wings. You're trending, want to see? Karoline shook her head gently. Later, let's finish what we came here for. The break ended, cameras rolled again. Ellen returned with a grin, but this one lacked teeth. Welcome back, everyone. Things got a little intense before the break. Let's cool things down, shall we? She turned to Karoline, who was already facing her. I didn't bring you here to fight, I brought you here to understand. Karoline didn't blink. Then start with a question. Maybe next time start with a question, not a punchline. Oof, the crowd murmured again. Ellen shifted gears. Let's talk about joy. For a moment, you're a woman in politics. Surely there's something you and I can agree on, right? Karoline leaned back just a bit, gaze steady, sure that Americans are desperate for honesty and tired of shows pretending to have it. Boom. Ellen's smile cracked. For real this time, but she wasn't ready to give up. You know, Karoline, she said, fingers tapping the armrest, you're very confident for someone who's so new, and you're very dismissive. Karoline replied. For someone who claims to uplift women. The crowd gasped again. For the first time, the Ellen show didn't feel like a sanctuary of clapping and laughter. It felt like a reckoning. Ellen laughed nervously. Well, this has taken quite the turn. Karoline nodded calmly. It usually does when truth walks in. And with that, the audience, young, old, red, blue, broke into thunderous, divided applause. Some stood, some sat stiffly, but everyone was fully, undeniably awake. Ellen's usual control over the room over energy, tone, and laughter was slipping fast. She tried to smile through it, but the rhythm was off. The audience, once her orchestra, was playing its own tune. Now Karoline didn't exploit it. She simply let the silence linger. Then she leaned in, her voice lower, more deliberate. You know, Ellen, I didn't come here to argue. I came here because you invited me. But from the moment I sat down, I was treated like a problem, not a guest. Ellen blinked, caught off guard by the measured tone. Karoline, a real conversation continued. You say you want unity, you say you want dialogue. But you invited me here and expected me to apologize for what I believe before we even had a real conversation. The room quieted again. You could hear someone cough in the upper left row. No music, no laughter, just quiet. Karoline's words weren't shouted, they were anchored. You mocked my political views, you questioned my faith, you called my career a script. And now that I pushed back, I'm being called aggressive. She shook her head. That's not a conversation, that's a trap. Boom. The studio, now fully silent, held its collective breath. And then someone clapped, one, then three, then a wave. Not everyone, but enough. To rattle. Ellen, the host, laughed awkwardly. You've rehearsed this well. Karoline looked directly at her number. I've lived it. Another clap. Then a voice from the crowd, deep and clear. Let her talk. Ellen shot a glance at her producer, but she knew it was too late to steer this. Karoline leaned back slightly, eyes scanning the room. I work with a president you don't like, that's fine, but I love my country, I believe in its people, and I don't need Hollywood's approval to know what's real. She turned back to Ellen expression softening just slightly. You don't have to agree with me, but if this show is truly about kindness, then maybe start by showing a little. It wasn't a line meant for applause, but it got one loud real Caroline lasting. Ellen's face was still, her jaw slightly clenched. She'd faced tough interviews before, but none like this, because for the first time it wasn't a senator or a celebrity across from her, it was a young woman with steel in her spine and no interest in playing nice. And the crowd wasn't laughing anymore, they were listening. Ellen adjusted in her chair, the light sheen of sweat now visible along her temples, subtle but real. She wasn't used to being challenged like this, especially not on her own turf. The applause still lingered in the corners of the studio like smoke after a fire. She tried to clear it with humor. Caroline, she said, her voice just a bit sharper. I've had on world leaders, artists, activists, but I've never had someone come on my show to lecture me. Caroline raised an eyebrow. Then maybe it was overdue. That hit hard. Ellen leaned forward, now voice tightening. You act like you're some kind of hero, but let's be honest, you're a press secretary. You read statements, you deflect, you spin, that's what your job is. Caroline's face didn't change, but her voice did. It dropped a half-octave, calm that hit hard. Cold. You just described exactly what you're doing right now. The audience gasped. Ellen tried to laugh, but it caught in her throat. Oh, come on. Caroline didn't blink. You're spinning because this isn't going how you expected, and instead of adjusting, you're attacking. Ellen opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Caroline continued, I didn't come here to be liked, I came here to be honest. If that's threatening, maybe the problem isn't me. That line stuck to the walls of the studio like glue. Then in a moment that changed everything, Ellen fired back with something too sharp, too personal. Maybe if you stopped hiding behind that little cross of yours, people would take you seriously. The audience recoiled. Even the producers looked stunned. Caroline's hand slowly went to her necklace. She didn't touch it, she just let it be seen. Then she stood calmly, quietly. The room froze. She looked at Ellen, not with anger, but with deep disappointment. This, she said, is what the elite really think of people like me. She turned slightly toward the audience. You mock what I wear, you mock what I believe, and then you pretend you're about kindness. Dead silence. Ellen was visibly shaken. Dead silence. Caroline didn't raise her voice. She didn't storm off, she just said one thing, you just told the world who you really are. And with that she sat back down. A full 10 seconds of silence followed. Not a single clap, not a single word. Ellen had crossed a line, and Caroline, she had just turned the entire studio into a courtroom and let America be the jury. The silence after Caroline's last words was thick like fog on a cold battlefield. It wasn't a dramatic silence, it was an uncomfortable one, an exposing one, the kind that makes people shift in their seats and question everything they just saw. Ellen tried to break it. She looked at the camera and gave a weak smile. Well, that got serious fast, but the audience didn't laugh. Caroline didn't look at her. She looked straight into the camera, not with rage, not with defiance, but with calm, unwavering certainty. Millions of Americans wear a cross, she said, voice low. Millions pray quietly before work. Millions stand for the flag and bow their heads in grief when soldiers come home draped in it. She paused, letting the words settle. If those things make us a punchline in your world, then maybe the joke's not on us. That line hit like a freight train. Twitter exploded in real time. Within minutes, Jocker Ellen mocked faith and Caroline claps back were trending nation-wide. The control room panicked. Producers scrambled. Ellen's assistant flashed a note in bold letters. We're losing the audience hard. Back on stage, Ellen shifted in her seat, her voice shaky. Now Caroline, I didn't mean it that way, I was just trying to lighten the mood. Caroline finally turned to her again. Expression soft but firm. You can't hide behind comedy when it becomes cruelty. The crowd started to shift. First a middle-aged woman in the second row stood and applauded, then a college student in the back, then more. It wasn't everyone, but it was enough to break the illusion that Ellen had control. One audience member even shouted, "Let her speak." Ellen looked visibly rattled. Her posture stiffened. She picked up her cue cards, but her hands trembled slightly. She flipped to the next segment, then back again, then finally said, "We're going to cut to commercial." The lights dimmed. The damage was done. Cameras stopped, but in the control room the damage had already been done. On TikTok clips were flying. Caroline's quiet, "You just told the world who you really are," overlaid with captions like the moment Ellen lost the room. Fox News producers were already calling Caroline's team, and across social media a new image was being formed, not of a cold conservative press secretary, but of a woman who stood her ground without shouting, who stood for millions by standing tall in silence. Caroline wasn't just a guest anymore, she was the story. The Ellen Show's commercial break ended, but the energy never recovered. Ellen returned to camera with a strained smile. "Welcome back. Things got a little passionate today, let's move on." But America wasn't Ellen versus Caroline moving on. By the time the show aired on the West Coast, clips from the East Coast taping had already racked up 3 million views online. Fox News aired a full segment titled "Ellen versus Faith, Did She Go Too Far?" and TikTok, it was a battlefield. One viral video showed Caroline quietly adjusting her cross, then delivering her now iconic line, "You just told the world who you really are." The video captioned, "That wasn't a clap back, it was a cultural moment." Hit over 7 million views by midnight conservative influencers hailed Karoline as the unshakable voice of Middle America. Even moderate Democrats admitted on social media, "I don't agree with her politics." But Ellen crossed a line backstage. Karoline sat quietly with her assistant Maddie. Her phone buzzed non-stop, news alerts, booking requests, DMS from veterans, nurses, even former atheists thanking her for standing up. A message popped up from a contact saved as DT, "You were brilliant." They needed to see that. Karoline didn't respond. She just turned to Maddie and said, "We're not done." Book Hannity, Tucker and CNN back-to-back. Let's take this national. Across the country, reactions poured in. At a diner in Des Moines, a waitress pointed at the TV and said, "That girl just stood taller than most men I've seen on that stage." At a university in Chicago, a professor rewound the video 3 times, whispering, "She never even raised her voice." At the White House, a senior advisor smiled as he forwarded the clip to staff with one line, "Karoline just gave us a culture win." Meanwhile, Ellen's team went into crisis mode. A written apology was drafted but never posted. Her PR manager advised silence. "Let the news cycle move on," they said, but it didn't. The Crossgate began trending by morning. A poll from a major outlet asked, "Do you believe Ellen disrespected faith on live TV?" 68% said, yes, Karoline wasn't a side character in someone else's narrative anymore. She was a central figure in a national moment, and she was just getting started. 3 days after the interview aired, Ellen Can led her next taping. The official word was production scheduling, but the media didn't buy it. Headlines filled the feeds. Ellen faces fallout after faith clash. Karoline Leavitt goes viral for calm rebuke. Is daytime TV losing touch with America? Karoline, on the other hand, was everywhere. She appeared on Hannity, holding her own with poise. On CNN, she sat opposite a skeptical anchor and delivered every answer with clarity and conviction. She didn't gloat, she didn't spike the football, she just kept showing up, and America kept listening. At a small-town church in Georgia, the pastor used her quote in Sunday's sermon, "You can't hide behind comedy when it becomes cruelty." At a conservative women's conference in Texas, her speech was moved to the keynote slot. The crowd of 10,000 chanted her name before she even took the stage. Even in places she never expected support, it came. A well-known liberal columnist tweeted, "I disagree with Karoline Leavitt on almost everything. But that was one of the most disciplined, powerful media moments I've seen from any woman in politics." She didn't yell, she didn't play victim, she owned it. Meanwhile, Ellen's producers began receiving emails from longtime viewers saying they were deeply disappointed by her remarks. Sponsors began asking questions. In her gated home, Ellen sat with her head in her hands, watching the clip for the 12th time. She didn't recognize herself in the footage. It wasn't the joke that undid her, it was the moment. Karoline didn't flinch, the quiet, the weight of being on the wrong side of the line. Across the screen, Karoline had looked unshaken. On her own set, Ellen had looked petty. Back in DC, Karoline sat with her comms team. Her advisor placed a folder on the table. Late night offers, morning shows, podcast invites, you're hot right now. Karoline just smiled, "Not because I said something flashy, because I stayed still when it mattered." Her team nodded. This wasn't just a media victory, it was a repositioning. She wasn't the press secretary from New Hampshire anymore, she was something bigger, something unshakable. That moment on The Ellen Show didn't just go viral, it reframed who held the mic in American culture, and for once it wasn't the host, it was the guest. 1 week after the Ellen interview, Karoline stood on stage at the National Value Summit in Dallas. The crowd of nearly 20,000 people rose to their feet before she said a single word, and she didn't smile, not yet, because she knew this wasn't about applause anymore, it was about truth. Some said, "I went too far." She began, her voice steady. Others said, "I didn't go far enough." The room fell completely silent. "But I didn't show up on Ellen's stage to win a fight. I showed up to remind America that your faith, your values, your identity don't belong to late night punchlines." Applause erupted, but she held up her hand, calming them. "That moment wasn't about me, it was about all of you teachers who can't pray out loud." Veterans mocked for patriotism. Small town moms told they're outdated. "I didn't defend a necklace, I defended a belief." Her words landed like thunder. Clips hit X within minutes. Fox News ran her full speech live. CNN hosted a panel just to discuss its tone, message, and why it worked. Even The View cautiously acknowledged, "She's shaping the conversation whether we like it or not." And Ellen, she stayed silent. A written apology was finally released, vague and too late. Damage already done. Behind the scenes, Karoline's office received over 15,000 letters in 5 days, many handwritten from strangers across the country thanking her for speaking without screaming, for standing when others stayed silent. One note read, "I'm 76, lost my job for talking about faith at work. You gave me hope again." That letter hung on Karoline's office wall just beside a frame holding a screen grab of her from that day on Ellen's stage. Cross visible eyes, calm shoulders back, a symbol not of outrage but of strength. By the end of the month, 3 states had introduced new protections for religious expression in the workplace. Citing Karoline's moment as inspiration, she had become more than a guest on a talk show, she was a movement. And as she left the summit stage, her team asked, "Should we call this a win?" She paused, looking at the cameras now trained on her like they had been that day. "No," she said with a soft smile. "Call it a beginning. Some moments don't just happen on television. Some words aren't just spoken, they echo through hearts, cut through silence, and awaken the conscience of a nation." That day, Karoline Leavitt didn't just defend herself on Ellen's stage, she stood for millions whose faith, values, and identity had been mocked. She didn't stay silent, she stood firm, and with that she stirred something deeper. This is a story where confidence raised its voice, faith stood its ground, and truth finally thundered through. But what about you? Would you dare to speak up when the world expects you to stay quiet? If this story moved you, subscribe and don't miss the next episode of Surprising Stories, because in a world that still hides countless untold truths, we'll be here to uncover them one story at a time. Surprising Stories, this is where real defiance begins. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button for more emotional, dramatic, and unexpected tales. And thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.